All right, so we're here convened to finish this paper that we began last week on in defense of Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. It was a paper that was first written in 1987 by Lyndon LaRouche, the late economist. And he's a lot more than just a typical economist. I think people have gotten that sense, especially after that reading of last week. I didn't get as much hate as I thought I was going to. I was presuming that I was going to. Usually, every time I say something nice about Alexander Hamilton, I get a ton of hate emails flooding into my inbox for the crime of supporting a Rothschild stooge who was out to destroy the United States and create the Federal Reserve. And honestly, I didn't get any. I only got one angry email, and it wasn't even that bad. So I was pretty happy with that. Before we will be reading some papers by Alexander Hamilton. I'm thinking the constitutionality of the national bank is what Pascal and I were discussing. That's probably going to be a good thing. What LaRouche does, I think everyone's got a sense of this, is he's establishing not just why it was that he was choosing in the 1980s when he was running for the presidency to support a reestablishment of a third national bank of the United States, the first one and the second one having only existed, I think the first one's charter expired in 1811, and then you had a second national bank established during the War of 1812 to fight the British. I think Madison was the one who reestablished that after a certain period where he had to realize that without a national bank, he had no ability to properly carry out the fight against the British Empire at war. So it's nice in theory that you could, have completely unbounded free markets just self-regulate and have, the prices find themselves naturally based upon supply and demand and what people want to pay. It's a nice theory, but when you get into the real world where there's political agendas and actual power structures, which have often very nefarious intentions, as the British Empire, the City of London, the British East India Company always have, it doesn't really work anymore. Where, yes, they could get their victim nations that they want to destroy economically to take down their protective tariffs, shut down their national regulation of banks or other things in order to better flood their markets with cheap goods, or as the Chinese discovered with opium, in order to destroy their manufacturing, their ability to stand on their own 2 feet economically, or even to destroy the soul of the people, as the drug culture did in the case of the opium wars and beyond, or what we're dealing with today, right? Where Canada is also, we've just legalized every form of drug in British Columbia. That's that we are told is going to reduce crime, because now you're not going to be arresting people who are formerly, dealing in drugs, which was illegal. And so that's going to be good for the legal system, that these people will now be paying taxes on their drug profits, and we'll we'll have more revenue, more tax revenue as well, which is great. So we're told all of these nice things, but the reality is everywhere it's been done, you only have an increase of suicide, violence, like obviously even more drugs, and society gets weaker. There's a negative net value, and if you're a monetarist, you would not see that. So people like Madison realized pretty quickly that the theory of free trade is not actually what it was cooked up to be, and a certain measure of Hamiltonian economics were needed to be revived, which allowed for the carrying out the execution of the war against the British, and also then the stimulation of the economy, the building of internal improvements, things like the Erie Canal, these mega projects that were tied to the idea not of, simply a government, like a totalitarian government, shaping the entire system and all people within it to the will of leader. It was not that at all. There was a robust free enterprise, a lot of private businesses who were getting contracts to carry out productive work. And the effect was not only a benefit to the individual investors, the laborers, the people who were working in the society and investing into their society's growth by buying treasury bonds and other things that were tied to the growth of these big projects, but the nation as a whole was, gained greater productive powers, greater ability to be sovereign, to chart their own destiny. So that bank was killed ultimately by Andrew Jackson, as we discussed last week. And there had been a fight from 1836 onward. The the character of the battle over the soul of the United States was really between those leaders who tend to die while in office, who are reviving the Hamiltonian system. People like Lincoln, like even before that, Harrison, Zachary Taylor. After Lincoln, you had Garfield, you had Willie McKinley, you had Warren Harding, who was reviving protective tariff policy. You had FDR, who died while in office again, and JFK, all of whom were invoking the exact same principle of banking, which LaRouche said in the 80s has to be understood not just as a banking or finance thing, but rather as a branch of the sciences, as really economics as being the queen of all sciences, but also an art. So it wasn't just utilitarian, control the machine type of science. It was really a science of that took into consideration the voluntaristic character of human beings that are creatures of free will, of love, right? All of this has to be brought into consideration, but there are still universal constants, principles that we have to teach kids about economics, even in kindergarten, fundamental concepts, which are accessible to anybody. And if you are organizing your society correctly, this will not be a point of confusion or contention or debate anymore. There's, we all need food, we all need water, we all want these things to get better, not worse, our accessibility and the quality of these things over time, right? To the effect that we should all want better life for our kids and grandkids than we had. These are constants, regardless of whether you're Chinese or Indian or African or European, doesn't matter. That's true no matter what, and it will always be true. So to the degree that you got a society and economists who are trained with an appreciation for those laws, we're good. We're okay. To the degree that you fall off track and start worshiping money, you're in trouble. And you're into a spider's web now. So with that, let's do a little screen share and we'll finish reading this paper. If I could only find it. Hold on, I got too many things open here. Bear with me 1 second, guys. Pictures here. All right. Can people see my screen?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. All right. So who would like to read we're going to pick up at oh, right. We're going to read starting at political economy, page 9 of 14. Would anybody like to recap any points that stand out in their memory that were just important concepts from last week? There's a couple that I'd like to just point out before we start, but anybody have anything? The things that oh yeah, Pascal, yeah.
Well, maybe just to mention one thing, and it might spark like some memories for people, but LaRouche was mentioning the idea that basically, if you were to look back in history or look at like the primary mode of survival at the beginning, if you believe the anthropologists and how they discussed all of the matter around hunter-gatherers, you have a certain amount of land surface that you need to provide for people, right? For the food, everything to sustain themselves. And so he was starting by approaching this question of economy by this concept of what is the land area that you need to provide for a given population. And then that begs the question, how did we get to where we're at now? The population has increased. So what has made this possible? What has made the increase of population possible? And also to what extent, like what type of technology? Of course, different technologies have been used and different techniques also to grow food, to husband, I think it's called husbandry, the cattle and all that. So different techniques have been developed, different technology, and so how do you? That's all things that we know. of, and we can track it down historically. We can say like, okay, so we discovered, steam power at this point. We used the first nuclear power plant this year. So we can track all of these things, but behind this question of the landmass required and the technology required is also a question of the density of energy. So the rate of increase of these technologies and the rate of increase of the power of the machinery that you use, and how do you, that's like behind what you see, but it's also something that you can you can actually calculate, you can quantify and qualify. But what is the rate of change in these in a good economy, in a
Mhm.
that makes it survive for real, not just on a momentaneous span.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give that to people.
Yep. Very important concept. And that's also very similar to the Vernadskian idea we were reading about, right? Of the noosphere, that whenever you're looking at something, you're never looking at just, you're training your mind to never just look at objects and think they have self-evident existence. You're training your mind to see more with your mind's eye, so that you're looking not at a cup, but at a process of creation of ceramics, of raw materials that are transformed using certain types of technologies that were discovered, kilns, heating, right? You're thinking about the transportation systems. You're thinking about the ink, the presses, right? All of the machines and the machines that make machines. Whenever you look at something like that, and the interwoven, interconnected complexity that is intelligible. So and that's just for a cup, things get more complex as you get into more complicated things. But the point is, you're always looking at the cause of behind the surface appearance of things. You're not looking at the shadow. You're looking with the mind's eye, with your reason, at the process. Same thing for nature. When you're looking at a plant, you're never just looking at the plant. You're looking at a process that is allowing for the relationship of light from the sun to be converted into processes that do work, that sustain cycles, that have purpose, design within the biosphere, right? That's what Vernadsky was doing. That's how all of these American system economists like Henry C. Carey are all training their mind's eye to look at the world as it actually is, instead of getting caught with this idea of your sense perception. So Pascal, what you just said about what is it that allows a system to upgrade its power of productivity and its rate of change of that through the power of the creative mind, vital. Just to have that in the mind, right? Because that's an ongoing theme. LaRouche is always finding new ways of hammering at. And I'd say the three key points from the paper are these things you see here, that your society is the guideposts you have to know that your orientation is right, because there's no formula for success that's always going to work in general as a formula, but there are constants and principles that are always going to be true. And number one is the amount of usable energy supplied, both per capita and per square kilometer. This is again what Pascal was getting at, must increase. You cannot reduce the way we see today with the shutdown of quality of energy or food production. You can't per capita and per square kilometer of a nation's area. You cannot reduce that productivity. You have to always think about how do you increase that without assuming that there's like an upper, asymptotic upper limit. Don't assume that there's this limit to growth. Because if you're thinking about new discoveries, you're always able to leap beyond your limits that are always there pressing on you at all moments, but you're always able to leap beyond them. But you have to do something different. You can't do the same thing. Number two is what is sometimes termed the effective energy flux density of the energy supplied and applied must increase. And remember, we had a quick example here of the simplest form of like a knife. Two people have two knives, and there's the job to get done is to cut that orange, but one person uses the knife on the flat side to press up against the orange, and it's a messy effect. Whereas the other person is actually using the edge of the knife. So all of that energy is concentrated over a very small surface area, meaning the effect is that orange is easily sliced, not a lot of effort put in, nice, clean, desired outcome, right? Half an orange cut in half. The other person is just putting in tons of energy into that knife. So much energy input, very little output, and it's messy. So energy, that's the idea of the energy flux density is increasing, right? And that always has to increase. And the third is the level of technology of internal organization of the process of production must be advanced. Right. And we had the example of like two machines doing, designed to do the same job. Let's say two Volkswagen buggy and a Porsche engine. They're two engines designed to make a car run. One is much more effective, gets much more effect because the organization of it is just different. It's better. Same thing. You can think about the organization of a society. So there's a variety of levels to this. So those are the three key points to walk away with. And I think with that, we can just jump straight into the political economy section. Who would like to, Sean, you want to read today?
I would, but I don't have my laptop with me. I'm looking at this on a phone right now.
Oh, yeah, don't worry about it. All right, good. No, not a problem, man. Who would like to read? All right, do it.
Okay, political economy. A modern economy has two interdependent aspects. The first aspect, which we have stressed so far, is the physical economy, the production and physical distribution of goods. This is the aspect of the economic process which falls under the heading of physical science, as we have reviewed what is involved in that. The second part is the political processes governing an economy. These political processes include the issuance of money, the organization of credit and banking, taxation, and tariffs. Since employment, production, and physical distribution on the real or physical side of the economic process are organized through buying and selling at money prices and are fostered or suppressed by the way credit and banking are organized and are affected by taxation, the two sides, the physical and political, interact in this way. This interaction is what we ought to understand one another to mean when we use the term political economy. Our founding fathers' knowledge of physical economy was obtained from about 1766 in the relatively greater degree from French industry and science, and their theoretical knowledge from Leibniz and Leibniz's indirect influence. The emphasis on productive powers of labor in Hamilton's report on the subject of manufactures is strictly Leibnizian. Their notions of the political side of the economic process are best traced to the pre-Andros period of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the 18th century influence of Cotton Mather. Benjamin Franklin's 1729, A Modest Inquiry into the Nature and Necessity of Paper Money, is an affirmation of Cotton Mather's policy, a policy based on the successful use of paper money issue, and state banking in the pre-Andros Massachusetts Bay Colony. Our founding fathers had none of the illusions about the magic of money popular around Washington and elsewhere today. They knew that the source of wealth was the production of physical goods and of public improvements such as roads, canals, bridges, ports, and similar works. Paper money, credit, banking, and so forth were necessary arrangements for efficient commerce, but nothing more than that. Today, when I outline what I shall do as president, someone always pops up to ask, where's the money coming from? Very simply, under our Constitution, the US Congress shall enact a law authorizing the issuance of between $500 billion and $1 trillion of US Treasury currency notes. This money will not be spent by the federal government. It will be lent through banking system channels to farmers, manufacturers, public utilities, and capital accounts of federal, state, and local agencies responsible for building public works. We shall put farms, industries, and people back to work, producing new physical wealth. They will produce more wealth than is loaned to get this production into motion. Their wages and the business income of farms and industries will put added money into circulation, increase the tax revenues of the federal government without raising tax rates. If this money is loaned at low borrowing costs at prime rates less than 2%, and if federal tax schedules provide generous investment tax credits to those who invest in creating high technology workplaces in production, we shall do quite well without having to borrow money from anyone but ourselves. The problem today, and over the past 20 years, has been that the political side of the economy has been mismanaged very badly. The percentage of the total labor force employed in producing physical wealth has been collapsing, while the combined total of unemployment and employment in administration and superfluous services has piled up. Tremendous fortunes have been made in pure financial speculation, with no increase of physical production to show for it. We have been going deeper and deeper into debt to produce less and less per capita. It's a terrible way to run a railroad. The only major risk in the government's creating very large issues of money for lending are that the lending and tax policies might move money in the wrong direction, into more financial speculation, and more employment in administration and marginal qualities of services. The trick is to lessen the tax burden on investments in high technology, goods producing workplaces, and to steer most of the newly created credit into those kinds of investments. My immediate goal is to add 5 million new industrial workplaces, emphasizing improved technologies during the first 2 to 3 years of my administration, and steer the nation in the direction of employing about half of the total national labor force into occupations as farmers, industrial operatives, and operatives employed in constructing and maintaining utilities and public works. There is no magic in it. It is simply a matter of government reaching a consensus with entrepreneurial farmers and industrialists, and governments delivering on promises to promote technological progress in and expansion of production and employment in manufacturing, industries, and similar forms of employment. Set the investment tax incentives high. Keep low-cost credit flowing through the private banks, and ensure that there is a sufficient rate of scientific progress being generated. This program will not be inflationary. It will be deflationary. The higher the percentile of the labor force employed in producing wealth, and the lower the percentile employed in administration and marginal services, the lower the cost of every article produced. The fewer the number of overhead salaries tacked onto the price of what the farmer or industrial operative produces. Keep financial speculation down too. That will be indispensable under conditions of financial crisis. It is a good practice generally, since every dollar of income from financial speculation becomes an added dollar of overhead tacked onto prices of commodities.
Yeah, so far, a lot of rich ideas here. Anybody, are people generally following, or if there's any questions, now's a good time to throw one out if you have one, or if you have any trouble with what he said. Okay. The thing I would just point out, Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve, they just had a central bankers annual meeting at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and obviously these concepts being raised here, they're not present. So what did they do? They're trying to deal with the problem of inflation in the most incompetent way. They're basically saying, okay, we're going to raise interest rates, and then we're going to deal with inflation. So you're going to make it harder. You're going to contract the available money in the system because it's going to be harder to take out loans. It's going to be harder for businesses. You're going to be able to make sure that without as much money going around, that the money is going to somehow have more value because there's going to be less of it. And as a consequence, internationally, other governments of the world are also going to be forced to raise their central bank interest rates too, because otherwise, if there's differentials that are too big, if the U.S. government is offering high interest, then people are going to want to buy U.S. notes internationally and sell if they've got, let's say, rupee holdings, which have a lower interest. If they're an investor in like a bondholder, right? They're investing in rupees, and the rupees are paying them less for interest, but they could get more by buying U.S. dollars. They're going to sell their rupees, buy U.S. dollars. That'll, in one way, help the U.S. dollar because you want to have more investors. But on the other hand, it's going to weaken the rupee. So all of the other India then has to also increase to a similar parity. This is going to cause a much broader international contraction of available credit at a time of scarcity, even though it's artificial scarcity. So the logic is, well, money printing doesn't work. When we had low interest rates and we were just flooding the system with money, 80% of the money now in circulation was all printed in the last 2 years. That created more inflation. That made it worse. So money printing can't be good. So maybe contracting money, tight money, that's going to be the answer. Well, that's not going to work either. So if it's neither one nor the other, they're both going to make it worse, because what's the real problem that's being ignored in the discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's where you have nobody's looking at the actual breakdown of the physical economy, and that when we did have an easier, like a low interest, easy money type of process, we were printing money out of the wazoo, trillions of dollars out of the thin air, but we didn't increase the productive powers of labor. We invested in no productive infrastructure, no new science. We didn't rebuild the manufacturing. We didn't rebuild, like the productivity physically went down. But what LaRouche is saying is, if you can direct the flow of that credit in ways that make it more lucrative to produce high-speed railroads, to do things that are really useful and productive, then you're going to have more money, but it will be anti-inflationary. The buying power of the actual dollar will increase because your overall nation's productivity is increasing. And that's the mathematical economists cannot understand that. They're only looking at numbers. They cannot see the qualitative changes. They're mentally blind to it. And it's really important to be sensitive to how people are mentally castrated, and they cannot recognize these basic, seemingly obvious things. So, but that's one of the key lessons to carry out. Yep.
I would like maybe to add a small thing.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot believe those people don't understand those principles. I think that they are more goal-oriented to favor what is called FIRE, financial and real estate, and the other one I forget. I for
financial
insurance. Exactly. Okay, so I think that because it would be too far-fetched to say that they don't understand the principles of physical economy. I'm a bit stubborn about that. They have a goal. They want to favor FIRE.
Yeah, well, I think that from the top down, like the actual controllers of the great game. I was more referring to the majority of economists trained to play by the rules of the game. They don't understand it. But I think you're right. The higher ups who actually pay attention to the nature of the game as a whole and use economics as a way to entrap and destroy nations, they are aware of it. I agree with you on that point. Which is also why they're also setting up the system to be to become a time bomb of a giant debt bubble to be triggered and popped or detonated at their expedience.
Yeah,
they're aware.
And maybe an argument by aesthetics, because aesthetics is another way to talk about ethics or morality. Even the kings of Middle Ages, they understood that by building something beautiful, they are more contributing to their society and their kingdom than by putting the gold coins in chests in their towers, So, and they were not advanced economists of the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, they weren't animated by a death cult, unlike some other societies.
Yeah, exactly.
That we might know of. Yeah. Well, that's another thing I would just say too. Like a lot of the Austrian school economists who abide by the Habsburg Austrian school theories of von Mises and von Hayek, they also have a total problem with what's being said here, because in their mind, any use of government, state power is all bad because it all deprives the individual of the freedom to do whatever they want to do. And that's part of the consequence of doing things that involve law. Your desire to do whatever is reduced when there's a law. And if it's an economic law or a mandate of a nation to do something, then that constricts individual freedom in some ways, and thus it's evil. So they can't even conceive of a nation state using central power for the good. It's only for the bad, even if it appears for the good. So when you say that you've had examples of leaders throughout history who wanted to build something beautiful, it is just in the mind of an Austrian school thinker, all equally bad. It would have been better if the government didn't exist and people were allowed to just somehow self-organize and build the pyramids by themselves, I guess, or I don't know.
Then what would you say? It's it's not free trade, it's not liberalism, it's Keynesianism.
Repeat that.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned, I wanted to bring that up too, but you have the debate right now over the interest rates will be like more or less the Austrian school or the Keynesian school. So as people understand, but can we make it maybe a bit clearer for people that would listen to this later on? Because you've written on the issue, or maybe we can send them to your articles.
Sure. Yeah. Juan, you want to address that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. My philosophical proclivity. If I'm off topic, just stop me. But to a certain extent, it's also deeper. Okay, because I'm obsessed with the transition from the fake democratic man to the true democratic man. And if you remember our discussion in the past, the fake democratic man is blocked at the level of mathematics. So for him, mathematical formulas are the absolute truth, okay? And if you are blocked at that level of understanding, you might have in your heart the conviction that there is no other way. Okay, to go back to our discussion, are they truly dumb, or they only favoring the FIRE sector, finance, insurance, real estate? I think that there's a part that they are favoring the FIRE sector, but I think to a deeper epistemological reflection, they also stuck somewhere between the fake democratic understanding and the true democratic understanding. For example, the old kings, who understood intuitively it's better to build a beautiful church than to let the golden coins in the chest in his tower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
After all, the old king was a true democratic man, after all.
Yep. Well, and these are the ideas. I mean, LaRouche brought up Benjamin Franklin's 1729 on the necessity of a paper currency. He's going to bring up some other thinkers too, and we might want to read a couple of them maybe, who all came out of that world in mostly in France, but there were other people in different parts of Europe who had innovated an idea, as you described, of an economic system based not on the extraction of wealth from slave labor or feudal serfs, serving a landlord, or war, which was another way of making money, or giving, because you could basically loot your victims, get more territory. That was another way of getting wealth. Or another way was usurious loans, right? Get people into debt traps. That's an old thing that goes back a very long way. But or just make rents, right? Get people to get into rents, and then you extract rents and bleed them. So that was a very self-defeating way of doing business that got money for a corrupt clique of Timocrats, but it destroyed the overarching nation's ability to exist by destroying the individual people.
Of fake.
What?
Fake democratic man.
Fake, sorry, yeah, lower order democratic. Yeah, fake democratic man.
Yeah.
And I mean, the idea of, okay, we're going to now have our funds go towards improvements, canal building. This is what people like Mazarin put forth with Colbert, who carried it forward, of cameralism, right? French cameralism or dirigism, as a way to think about a new way of doing wealth by creating wealth, by making things better in a variety of ways. And all of a sudden you just transform the system so the quality of abundance is increasing, and you didn't have to hurt anybody. You made people's lives better. And it was that actually caused the overarching driver for abundance that could then be reinvested back into the system. So that's what people like the founding fathers the best founding fathers were studying. Not all of them, but the best ones who made the biggest difference for the good. So, and Ben Franklin too. And as far as Keynes, yeah, he definitely, I mean, what people might see as a Keynesian right now, when they're reading LaRouche, they might be, oh, like, that's Keynes. And I would just say, as a challenge for anybody listening, if you feel that way, think about why you're wrong. Think about what LaRouche is saying that Keynes would fundamentally disagree with. And it'll make, we won't give the answer. It's
a hint. It's always about the epistemology.
It's a big part.
One thing I'd like to say is that I've been doing a little bit of study about the Fed recently, and I kind of I would say that I don't know whether the interest rates ultimately are hiking them up is a good thing to do, but what it is doing is it's forcing Europe down. It's forcing Davos down, and right now probably one of the biggest enemies right now to humanity is Klaus Schwab and this group of guys at Davos and what they're trying to do. And
yeah, no, I mean, I disagree with Tom Luongo in that sense, because I think that I mean that I said Tom Luongo just because I know a lot of people are saying it. He's the one I've been reading the most because I like him. But on that point, I think by doing what they're doing right now, the oligarchy fundamentally wants to destroy all of Europe as much as they want to destroy the United States. It's not a Europe versus US fight. It's the oligarchy versus everyone fight. And they want to undo Europe as well. They want to shut it down. But they also want to trigger the blowout of the whole system. So they're trying to get a blowout at a certain point when it's expedient. And I think they're doubling down right now on something which is going to have a general blowout. It would be okay if you had a strategy in mind of like doing a controlled demolition and making sure that the detonation, the blow, is directed entirely towards these oligarchical bankers. That would be fine. Which is why you want things like Glass-Steagall. Like if you were to do it with an idea of separating the banks the way Franklin Roosevelt did, forcing the speculators to take the hit and protect, provide a firewall protecting the clean part of the economy and all of the citizens, the savings, the clean credit that you want to protect and save as savings banks are concerned. That's why we have the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was created for that purpose. You provide a federal insurance to protect the savings of people in the clean part of the banking system. So if we had that in mind, you could trigger the blowout and make sure that everything, they take their losses and they don't get bailed out. They just die. That would be fine. But right now, I don't see that discussion happening around Jerome Powell or anything like that. And I think if they don't have that in mind, it could be really messy. And I don't think it would just be Europe and the Davos crew taking the hit. I think it would be more out of control.
Well, since Declan wrote an excellent paper on the bankers.
You wrote two.
Two. Well, I read just one, so I will read the second one. So what I mean is that those bankers are private bankers, okay? So we cannot expect them to self-destruct. If they are doing things that seems to be self-destructive, it's only seemingly self-destructive because precisely the fake democratic man are characterized by fake justice. So they're not going to kill themselves. It's much more for control.
Yeah.
Are we talking about right now the characters at the Jackson Hole meeting, or who are we talking about when you say?
Yes, the characters at Jackson Hole meeting, because I would rather agree with Declan, because the expression Davos group for me, it's all encompassing. Okay, it's not only Klaus Schwab, it's all the fake democratic man vying for control.
Yeah, but what Declan was inferring is that there's a break or a battle between the Davos clique is something other than the Federal Reserve and U.S. New York bankers on Wall Street who are in opposition. Or that right? Am I getting that right?
Oh
Yeah.
Oh,
that's what.
Yeah. Well, I would say that if it's true, I would consider it as minor factional battles. Those people agree on the essentials.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree with that too. I think they're committed to depopulation.
But it doesn't.
I think that there's a fight over who's going to have a top seat at the table.
Yes, but the Quebecers have an excellent expression for that, au plus fort la poche. Okay, so there might be minor factional battles inside them, but the one who will win, c'est au plus fort la poche. The winner gets all, if you want to translate in English.
So to move it back into the reading here, the key point takeaway is if you do things with a certain sense of these physical principles, you can have more money printed, but it will be as an effect deflationary, not inflationary, because the buying power will increase as you do all of these other, you direct it towards improving the productive powers of labor per capita and per square kilometer. And he mentioned here that your idea of the price of commodities, the reduction of speculation, the useless part of economic activity can be shrunk consciously as the more useful part can be increased. Just hold that in mind, that these are all things that they call it dirigisme because it's like a sign of directing, right? Like a director or a conductor of an orchestra has to think about certain ways to make the orchestra get the best performance, best outcome. That's sort of what you'd want to think about as an economist or a statesman as well.
Yeah. Let's call it économie intégrée, integrated economy.
That's one. I like that. Sure.
Yeah. because you have to take well, it's complete. Okay, I'm not against fire, but an economy cannot be only composed by fire.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, exactly. All right. Want to wrap up this section?
Okay. So let us suppose that I were president for 2 terms. In that case, before I left office, the percentage of our national labor force employed as manufacturing operatives would have doubled, while the number of working farmers would remain about the percentage existing today. This would nearly have the real cost of every manufactured item produced, simply through large cuts in the overhead burden tacked onto the price of things produced. Balance the budget? Easily. The trick of balancing the budget is essentially keep tax rates low and tax revenues high. How? Simply increase national income. Low tax rates mean, among other things, a more rapid investment in new workplaces. By expanding production, the government gains more from expansion of the revenue base than it loses by not raising tax rates. Government must strike a reasonable balance between the two, subject to imperative national needs. The political side of the economy is the easiest part of the problem. We need nothing more than a government with the knowledge, political will, and political support to do what must be done. The real mental challenges come in the area of physical economy.
Mhm. Someone else want to pick up the reading?
I can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, my science driver program. My first concern as president, apart from preventing the financial system from blowing wide open, would be to get rates of productive employment up. Those among you old enough to remember 1940, 1943 will understand this the quickest. We must begin with the planned facilities and workplaces which we can reopen for production. A few years down the line, after new capital investments in plant and machinery take hold, the high rates in technological progress will be seen. That's the way it worked during 1940-43. That is approximately the way it will work during most of my first administration. It will be during the last 2 years of my first administration that the impact of technological progress begin to be felt by the population more generally. My duty is to ensure that long after I'm out of office, the United States is absorbing improved technologies at rates sufficient to increase our per capita output tenfold, approximately each generation. There is not pie in the sky. We already have and have in sight new technologies adequate to trigger the greatest boom in the history of mankind. I start with scientific and related manpower. To achieve what I have set as my goal, we must build up the percentile of combined scientists, engineers, and research and development operatives to about 10% of the total labor force. My next problem is to rebuild the US machine tool industry to a scale and rate of turnover sufficient to transfer the new technologies generated in research and development into production in general. If investment tax credit incentives are high enough, and if large flows of low-cost credit are flowing into industries' appetite for improved products of the US machine tool sector will be enormous. government must ensure that the machine tool sector is being fed with large doses of the kinds of technological progress which our industries will gobble up under such circumstances. The president, with cooperation of the Congress, has three major economic weapons for fostering high rates of technological progress. One, US military expenditures. Two, non-military research and development programs, wholly or partially backed by government. Three, public works, both governmental and by public utilities. If the federal government plans its budget in these three areas properly, the government can shape the net impact of this expenditure to foster high rates of technological progress, spilling over into private investment. The practical problem on which I have been working for about a decade, most emphatically, is to devise the best way in which either I or some other president could do this. It happens that all technological progress likely to occur on Earth during the coming 50 years will be concentrated in four areas. One, organized plasma processes at very high energy flux densities, control thermonuclear fusion as a primary energy sources for man on Earth, and in space exploration is a leading part of this. However, with these temperatures and with associated techniques for handling hot plasmas, every branch of metallurgy will be revolutionized, breaking the limits of every presently imaginable limit to natural resources on Earth. Two, control pulses of coherent electromagnetic radiation, compound pulses of this sort. This is already emerging as a revolution in machine tool design and will be the machine tool industry of the future. Three, optical biophysics. A major advance beyond molecular biology is currently in progress. The study of our living processes characteristically tuned electromagnetic processes of special characteristics. This direction in biology was implicit in the work of Luca Pacioli and Leonardo da Vinci, and was accelerated for a while by the work of Louis Pasteur and others on optical activity of living processes. Modern techniques enable us increasingly to get at these processes in the very small. A revolution in biology is now in progress as a result. Four, new dimensions in computer technology. We now need urgently what are called parallel processing modes of computer design, capable of processing billions or even trillions of flops per second. Progress in this direction is underway, but more distant is the development of new kinds of optical, analog, digital hybrid computers, capable of performing explicit solutions to nonlinear problems stated in terms of the Gaussian complex domain. We need such instruments for many branches of laboratory and other research. We need such instruments to aid us in remote control of the new energy-dense productive processes in space exploration applications. Mm-hmm. For the next 10 to 15 years, there are three very urgent programs of government, each of which requires intensive investment in some or all of these four areas. One, military. Moscow's rapid development of its own version of SDI, of which the first generation is supposed to be deployed by 1992, and Moscow's rapid progress in developing radio frequency and other strategic and tactical assault weapons. Biology. It is very unlikely that we shall master a cure for AIDS without a leading contributing role by optical biophysics research. Progress in this direction will also be important in our continuing efforts to conquer cancer and to deal with various problems of diseases, of aging, of tissue. 3, a Moon-Mars colonization project with the objective of establishing the first permanently manned colony on Mars by about 2027 AD.
A little behind schedule.
A tad.
Yeah.
I intend to steer
Just
as
quick,
much.
so people know when he says optical biophysics, what it just means is like what Dr. Claridge was discussing with Luc Montagnier and Alexander Gurvich in the classroom a couple of weeks back, the role of light in life, and how light both interfaces with an electromagnetism, which light is a part of the spectrum, right, of EM waves, both shapes the behavior for good and for bad of living cells. But also when you look at DNA, as Montagnier proved, cells themselves are both absorbers, they're antennas as well, and transmitters of, or creators of light photons as a way to both signal each other, to coordinate and harmonize all of their bioactivity, since, you know, thousands of new cells are coming into existence and dying every second. So if not million, I think it's actually more millions. So that's being communicated by very low level light. That's very important. So that's what LaRouche is basically saying, is that the next generation discoveries in health science are going to occur when we shift gears and start looking at the electromagnetic properties of life instead of just looking at it, you know, the way we do under this idea of reductionist biology. So optical biophysics, that's a very important idea.
Exactly. I intend to steer as much of the military procurement budget as possible into advanced systems. This will be indispensable to maintain effective national defense. I have the side benefit of building up our machine tool sector to the great advantage of the civilian sector. We should probably be spending about $3 billion a year on biological research into a cure for AIDS. Of course, it was $3 billion of 1987. Mm-hmm. A very large fraction of this should go into optical biophysics, including more efficient instruments for detecting various forms of AIDS-like and other viruses in samples. Much of this expenditure will go into laboratory instruments of advanced design, indispensable for this research. This will generate a valuable new branch of industry within the machine tool sector. The Moon-Mars program is not an optional prestige project. The primary mission of the program is the establishment of astrophysical laboratories at a required distance from the Sun. The principal duty of these installations near the orbit of Mars is to focus upon very unusual phenomena in our own and distant galaxies. The immediate benefit of this is uncovering new physical principles of the universe, principles which will become indispensable for life on Earth during the second half of the coming century. Since a sound Mars colonization program will require about 40 or more years to develop, we must begin now, or we may be starting too late for our great-grandchildren's needs. The only foreseeable way in which we could colonize Mars economically would be to build much of the spacecraft and equipment which are used on Mars on the Moon. So the industrialization of the Moon, largely with automated or semi-automated industries, is a necessary stepping stone to Mars colonization. This Moon-Mars program to be completed step by step over about 40 years. I project as the main science driver program of my own and later administrations. In manpower, the project will be approximately the scale of the Kennedy administration adopted for the NASA program. The NASA program repaid the US civilian economy with more than 10 cents of benefits for each penny spent on NASA. The Moon Mars program will have the same kind of effect. For example, the first step is to develop a cheaper and better way to get into Earth's orbit from Earth's surface. We are at the limit of efficiency and cost for rocket power. We are now ready to proceed with a better approach. This new approach will be a two-part airplane rocket ship. The aircraft will go high into the stratosphere at speeds between 8 and 16 times the speed of sound. There, the aircraft will launch the rocket craft and return to an airport on Earth. I have two designs for such a system on my desk, one developed in West Germany and a modification of the German program developed in Italy. We are speaking of something which could be developed to fly within about 7 years, allowing for all reasonable bottlenecks. Such a hypersonic aircraft would have other uses. At 8 times the speed of sound, we could fly to the most distant airport on Earth in not more than 3.5 hours. At double that, we could reach Tokyo in about an hour and Western Europe in about a half-hour flying time, probably about an hour from terminal to terminal. Developing such aircraft would mean a giant leap in the retooling of our aircraft industry and in retooling of the firms with our vendors to that industry. The same technologies would have many other uses besides those in aircraft design. As such, the way the Moon Mars program would pay us back would be in 5-year-long half cycles. We would have to ante up the advance money to cover the entire investment in each 5 years of the program phases. But during the second 5 years, our economy would be paid back in improved productivity gained from the technology developed over the preceding 5 years, and so on. By the time the first permanent colony was established on Mars, the entire project would not have cost us a net cent. We would have made a substantial profit on the entire investment. These various research and development programs would be the government's contribution to generating the new technologies needed to push the development of the machine tool sector, and thus ensure that the private sector had the highest possible rate of technological progress and increases in productivity. To ensure the best result, the Department of Treasury and Energy would make use of the LaRouche-Riemann method. That method of analysis would be used to monitor bottlenecks in the flow of advanced technologies into the economy, to detect the problem and work to correct it long before any significant slowing of the rate of national economic growth occurred. Were Alexander Hamilton alive today, he would smile as he accused me of stealing his program. Then he would ask, show me how you worked out the methods of measuring the connection between rates of technological progress and rates of increase in productive powers of labor. wouldn't talk about much else, since on everything else we would agree automatically.
All right. I'd totally forgotten about that last section on hypersonic passenger jets, as well as craft for outer space. I'd forgotten about that entirely. But it's true, like we were much closer, you could say, back in 1987 to these things, considering that things like the Concorde jet were, I don't know if they were developed yet or they were about to be developed. You guys all know about the Concorde?
I think it was in use.
It was in use at that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. I mean, you're dealing with a jet that would, I mean, that's a French jet that was taking you, how far beyond the speed of sound was that? That was like Mach 1?
I just know I don't know. I
No,
thought it was
yeah.
like
No. 1.5, 2, but not more than that.
Still pretty damn good. And I mean, that's
Yeah.
what, getting from Europe to New York in 2-3 hours or something, like it's pretty fast. And they just took them all down. By 2002, they were all canceled. They just turned them all to scrap metal.
Maybe just to remind everyone that Mach 1 is about 1,200 kilometers per hour.
It's pretty fast.
Yeah, it's quite good. So Lyndon LaRouche was speaking of Mach 8. It means something like 10,000 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about Mach 2.
So
Mach 2?
Yeah. Yeah, Mach 2. Yeah. Well, not bad. 2,400 kilometers per hour.
Yeah. No, I mean, you think about just how we've gone back in time, like the very opposite of what nature does. Nature is always moving, as we learned from Vernadsky, nature is always moving to higher states of productivity by itself, even without human beings. Nature is yearning to go beyond its limits and express itself more perfectly. Human beings just do it with the aspect of free will driving the process, which makes it even more beautiful. But we are completely going back in time and trying to reverse the flow of nature by undoing. 20 years ago, we shut down the Concorde. It's just wild.
Well, I don't want to bother anyone, but it was shut down because the American government told the French that Concorde was making too much noise. Of course, it was an excuse.
Yeah, wasn't there also like a disaster that was used as an excuse to say we don't want this anymore? Like one of the Concorde jets blew up or something, or crashed and had a malfunction, and then they said, okay, that's it, no more of this.
Yeah. But what is interesting in LaRouche's text is that everything he was suggesting was for human development, because nowadays, when I'm speaking of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 10, it's about anti-ship ballistic missiles or intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, each time that we are talking of Mach nowadays, it's not for human development, but rather for destruction.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, totally agree, Con. Because I remember the Concorde. I was in the travel business in the early 70s, and my friend named her. She opened a travel agency, the Concorde, Concorde Travel. So yeah, it was all for commercial use, and then it just all, like you say, disappeared. But how do we know it maybe didn't disappear, but maybe it went into now secret developments? They just took it off the commercial and went more into all these secret programs that we don't know about anymore.
Yeah, you're right. But at the same time, we know that there are military missiles flying at Mach 5, 10, 18, 20. So those things are not secret, rather than going to the moon or to Mars.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I think a lot of people would have a problem with when they would hear LaRouche say the importance of the national, military and defense as being a driver for these science crash programs. They'd be like, oh, look at what we've done with the military, destructively around the world. We don't want more of that. But it's like, no, if you think about it, every nation in the real world needs defense, and in the military, you're supposed to just like we looked at Da Vinci, you know, people are horrified by the fact that Da Vinci was working on military innovation, right? And new designs for winning wars. And they're horrified. They're like, oh, what a warmonger. And I've heard people bash Da Vinci for that. And it's like, well, the fact is the military is a place where, or in war, you got to get a job done and you can't mess around. So all of the resources are made available to get a job done that's impossible to do now, and try to, you know, so that goal orientation is what gives it value. It's not the destroying of human life that gives. That's not why progress often accompanies.
My computer's not working very well, but Da Vinci was also having Florence defend itself against Venice.
And that's the key thing too. Cynthia just said her computer's not working well, but yeah, you heard that? Yeah. So, and that's the key thing. It's supposed to be defense, not military offenses, but defenses. So you should always have a conduit between the military innovations that will be happening at a fast rate and the civilian sector in the productive process. You got to have that. And that's one of the things with Russia and the Soviet Union. One of the big problems is that they had a really advanced military sector in science, but it was not, there was no conduit between the military and the civilian economy. So you still had people using tractors from the 50s, all the way up through the 1980s. There was this big lag. It was really off kilter. And that's sort of the problem that we're in today. We're, you know, in the West, the free capitalist West, we got the same problem where all of the military has been absorbing discoveries and using it covertly, but then the real economy has been shut down.
Well, the Soviet Union had a special kind of state. But nowadays in the West, it's rather, as Ray McGovern say, is the Mickey Mouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It rhymes with Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, that's a great concept. Horrifying,
yeah.
Great.
No. Well, that's perfectly the network. Okay, I would say that Mickey Mouse is the perfect equivalent of the Davos group, because Davos group people tend to focus on bankers. Okay, but the Mickey Mouse is a richer concept than the Davos group in my mind.
Declan just shared an interesting article. I like it.
Yeah.
That's very cool. American Airlines agrees to buy 20 supersonic planes from a company named Boom. Not the greatest choice of a name for an airline industry, if that's the case. But Sonic Boom, I guess, is what they're alluding to. I didn't know about this.
Yeah, I heard it the other day, and it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, they call them Overture jets. Have they produced any of these jets, or are there prototypes that are actually out there in operation?
I do not know. I mean, that looks like a pretty realistic picture they have, but I'm not sure anymore.
But Boom, is it an American company?
Let's see.
No, it says here that this is a mock. The image that we see is a mock of their supersonic proposed Overture plane. The U.S. firm said that it is targeting mid-2020s for it to enter service, meaning, I guess in my mind, that it is not yet in prototype format, or maybe it is.
Okay.
That's the right idea. That's definitely the right idea. We need more things like that. Good.
Matt, you just mentioned about the military, like absorbing a lot of capital and engineering compared to the real economy. But I would also add it's the financial services that's absorbing a lot of engineers to create all these complex financial instruments, derivatives and credit default swaps that should have gone into the real economy. Well, that how to say, investment or direction of engineering should have gone in real economy, because in the program here, the science driver program, he mentioned that the number of scientists and engineers, combined scientists and engineers and research and development operatives should be up to about 10% of the total labor force. But he is focusing actually on on the real economy, because in that paragraph prior to that, he was talking about more of manufacturing and machine tools and all these things. But we don't have that happening. And I could recall Andrew Sheng, who was the chief advisor to China's Banking Regulatory Commission. He asked a question in an interview once, and it was quite interesting. He asked, why should a financial engineer who making all these complex financial instruments just to gamble on Wall Street, why should they be paid 4 to 100 times more than a real engineer? Because a real engineer would build bridges. What these financial engineers doing, they just building dreams. And when those dreams turn out to be nightmares, everybody else pays for it. So I think directing engineers into the right fields is part of is where we failed a little bit. And that's why we do have the progression that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that one?
No, go first, Matthew. Go first.
I was just gonna say there's a really good movie by Oliver Stone called Wall Street, also made in I think 1987 or 88, around the time this paper was being written, which does pedagogically in some ways hammer at that idea, between Charlie Sheen's father, Martin Sheen, playing the role of an actually productive worker, somebody who's an entrepreneur, I think in the airline sector, and his son who wants to be a financial services guy and uses skills and talent for that. And just, you got a really good clash of two paradigms. Even though Charlie's making tons of money, his dad's going bankrupt, living in poverty, but obviously it's very clear which one is actually productive and has real value. And the other thing that you just said, there's a documentary based on a book, and it's a great book called Quants. You heard about that? It's a story of the quantum scientists, everyone who was on the cutting edge of not quantum computing, but they were quantum physicists basically, and also people who were nuclear physicists who were all absorbed into the financial services sector in the 90s, and innovated the programming and the software that gave us derivative trading and high frequency trading and things like that. So their talents could have easily been deployed to aerospace and nuclear science and serious tech, but that was not what the system demanded of them, and they all got absorbed. A lot of them came from Russia too after the Soviet Union dissolved, and they couldn't, these great scientists couldn't find a job in their sectors, so they were absorbed by the city of London to make new weapons of mass destruction in the form of these things. So
was that book wrote by Scott Patterson?
Maybe. I got it on my bookshelf. There's a documentary based on it too. You can Google, if you Google Quants documentary.
Okay.
I don't know. I got too many books here.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I'm just looking at it right now on Amazon.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, what was that one?
Well, there's another movie, because I was going to mention a movie too. And there's another movie called The Bonfire of the Vanity, written by Tom Wolfe, and it's a little bit like the Wall Street one.
I never saw it.
And there was also, oh yes, it's a good movie. And there was exactly a confrontation between the own father, more of a productive guy, if you want, and the son who is a Wall Street wolf or shark. You can choose the kind of animal you prefer.
Yeah, it sounds really similar. Huh.
Yes, it's a very good movie. And but once again, it's the epistemology. Plutocratic ideals has been put on a pedestal, and aristocratic ideals have not been nurtured in the last 2-3 generations.
Yeah. I said too, like for people who want to, who might be listening on YouTube and you want to understand the fight paradigmatically between the multipolar alliance and, when you have Putin or Xi Jinping or Lavrov speaking well of things like the fourth industrial revolution. And these are the same words you hear from the Davos crowd of creepy assholes who say the same thing. What's being referred to is simply something that was understood going back to the 1950s, which is that when you look at the rate of change of certain technologies, computing technologies, automation, that we would be reaching a threshold whereby the entire system would be going through forms of major transformations. If you just extend that type of progress, right, the rates of increase of computing power into the future, certain things would open up. And major social ramifications would occur with this type of breakthrough that would, again, people would knew about this orientation for a long time. The question then became, would these new technologies be used to service and increase the quality of life of people, or would it be used by an oligarchy to enslave us and make us dumber? And so when you look at the list of things that LaRouche has laid out here, in terms of the organized plasma processes at high energy flux densities, controlled thermonuclear fusion is the primary source, the control of plasmas, the reorganization of metallurgy. So the very idea of how we process minerals is going to be completely obviously revolutionized as we think about plasmas instead of just matter as the three basic states that we find it in. Controlled pulse of coherent electromagnetic radiation. Automation is embedded in here as well. As far as space tech and other things, you want to have like computer learning, optical biophysics, big time in terms of health science, thinking, and also new dimensions of computer technology. He's alluding here to quantum computing. He's not calling it that, but that's really what it is. It's not just digital computing. You're looking at analog processes of computing like technologies. So all of these things, this is like a healthy orientation of the fourth industrial revolution, if you want to. I don't think we should call it that anymore. I think that name has gotten sullied enough, so we need to give it another name. But that's really the substance of it. So when you hear people like the Chinese leadership or the Russian or the Indians talking about it, that's generally the type of thinking. They're like, okay, it's going to happen. We're going to have quantum computing. We're going to have fusion power. We're going to have space tech. We're going to have automated automation. But if you look at what they're doing, they're actually talking about building colonies, like science colonies on the moon, the Russians and the Chinese, right? They actually have serious programs to get fusion and make it, part of the civilian economy as soon as you can. So it's a very different philosophy, or as you point out, Quan, a whole different epistemological orientation. Obviously, it's a different universe in which these technologies are coming online and how they're being used.
Yes, and maybe I would like to add something. China is often perceived with certain preoccupations by Western observers because it's true that Chinese culture is more a top-down culture, okay? Meaning that you have people at the top deciding for people at the middle and at the bottom. It could be a little bit scary for Westerners, and I understand them because I have a foot in each word. But that top-down culture, believe me or not, is not authoritarian as the Western prostitute tend to describe it, okay? That top-down culture is favoring meritocracy according to your epistemological development. It means that you can live your own epistemological level as you wish, but if you don't have the appropriate epistemological level to be in charge of something, you won't be given that responsibility, okay? And that could be perceived from the outside world as a little bit scary because it's true, it's a top-down society. But a top-down society with a classical education and with reasonable thinking behind that top-down structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that when the West was shining, it was a top-down society. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Epistemologically speaking. because I come back to one of my favorite concepts. Universal history is precisely the very long process that will make the social status match almost perfectly with the epistemological stature. Meaning, if that you have a high social status in a fair society, you got that high social status because you have the right epistemological development to be at that high station.
Mm-hmm.
But that pyramid model you're talking about, like it should be empowering too at the same time, top down, like it empowers, and eventually, like you say, the everybody, then there's a point where I kind of see it would inverse, and then it's kind of like that star, the two triangles. One is like a pyramid, and then the inverse of a pyramid, so that now that everybody is now very enlightened or educated or whatever. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
oh, absolutely, because that would be utopia, that all human beings would be aristocratic men and women.
I agree, but you hope that will happen.
Oh yes, that wow. In my idealistic representation of history, that would be the end point of history, okay? But not that would be the absolute end, but that's the end of history as a process of transformation. It would be eternity then, okay? The day that all human beings would be aristocratic men and women, history will keep on advancing, but at a much higher level than what we have now, which is more struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
And I thank you, Satomi, to mention that, because that top-down society is not closed, okay? It's not an oligarchy. It's open to everyone. Everyone has an equal chance to progress in his life, okay? Mm-hmm. Of course, not everyone has the same brain, the same family background. Those kind of natural injustices will still be there, but it's theoretically open to everyone, okay? The son of the peasant, the son of a Chinese leaders, and the son of a governor of a province, they have the same chance, opportunity, if they have the same epistemological development.
Yeah, that's why I like that word empowerment, because because there's always people that are going to be much more advanced quickly, but mentoring, empowering those that are a little slower or less fortunate in many other ways, education, family, whatever. I think those values are very important.
Yes, and after all, I mean, I often return to that, but that's the natural laws, okay? And you know that I often use etymology, okay? Hierarchy from hieros and ake, okay? Meaning the command of the sacred. The sacred being the natural hierarchy, the natural laws, but understood and used respectfully of each one. And each one is given dignity and respect at his place. There's no oppression.
Mm-hmm. Juan for president of the world.
I'm more of an advisor, but so you can name me on the advisory board. I would agree.
Juan for consigliere of the world.
Juan, that's precisely what we should have.
maybe not conciliary because it has a certain connotation.
No, people that don't want power should have power.
Well, the advisors are important because after all, if LaRouche, even if LaRouche was not elected president of the US, but he has been accepted as a major advisor, for example, he would have made a big difference.
Mhm. Yeah, massive.
Well, that was actually one. When you look through some of the waves he was making in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, up until the FBI cracked down on him and tossed him in prison. I think it was actually the year after this. It was 88 that the FBI cracked down and did the illegal raids and threw him in prison. He was making some incredible connections in terms of being invited into the inner policymaking circles of Lopez Portillo of Mexico, who called upon him to go to Mexico City. He met with him several times and set out a program for Mexico to do battle with the international financiers. That became something that Portillo actually ran with. You could see Portillo's speech at the United Nations a week after he met LaRouche, where he's like going strong. It's a serious speech calling for either we do this or we're gonna have a dark age. Indira Gandhi also met with LaRouche and his wife as well, and they set out a certain strategy that she adopted to a certain extent before she was assassinated. Fred Wills, the foreign minister of Guyana, became a founding member of the Schiller Institute and went to the United Nations and called for LaRouche's International Development Bank strategy openly in 1977. And Reagan actually tapped LaRouche to be a driver of the back channel discussions with the Soviets around the Strategic Defense Initiative that LaRouche had been campaigning for since the mid-70s, to render nuclear war impossible by having both the Russians and the United States jointly develop and control a system involving new plasmas, high-intensity lasers that would deactivate any nuclear weapon that would go off anywhere on the surface of the Earth with different, they called it Star Wars later on. But the SDI, that was the original idea that Reagan came out with when he invited the Soviets to jointly do it with the United States together as allies and make the Cold War obsolete. And again, that all of these things made him a very dangerous persona that earned him the ire of whatever forces at the time were controlling the FBI that cracked down on it. And despite that, he was still running for the presidency from prison twice. So that's interesting.
How did he manage that?
I don't know, but he did it. I got a book here from 1992 when he was in prison, and his running mate was Martin Luther King's right-hand man, Reverend James Bevel, who was his vice presidential running mate. He also had Amelia Boynton Robinson as well as a member of the Schiller Institute, a founding board member. And that's also Martin Luther King's, the woman who she arranged the entire Selma March. So like the old guard from the United States, they all kind of resonated and ended up working with LaRouche. And a few of his members, even in the mid 80s, 85, 86, were winning some pretty high level seats in Illinois, which got sabotaged from within the Democratic Party because they were running as Democrats, but you had a bunch of typical Democrats inside who ended up sabotaging them and ended up supporting the Republican opponents so that just so that they wouldn't get these LaRouche Democrats to take their seats. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of things that were intolerable to the powers that be. But I think what's most exciting in that whole process was the science work, because LaRouche was also, he had founded the Fusion Energy Foundation, which was they ended up producing a science magazine called Fusion, which by 1985 was the second most subscribed to science magazine in the United States. And when you read some of these magazines, they're all available now as PDFs online. It's serious stuff. He's bringing in all of the best cutting edge scientists who broke with the standard model, shackles, and all wanted to really make discoveries. And they were all working with Fusion around the world and Fusion magazine. And you were folding in politics. They were tackling the Malthusian, operations, the Club of Rome directly. It was strong, and the fact that this was being read by, I think, like 250,000 American households throughout the 80s was a shaper of the culture.
I can't see LaRouche as a Republican. Was he he had his own independent when he was running?
He was originally an independent, and then when you discovered that Franklin Roosevelt was actually not a bad guy in the 70s, he realized that there was something redemptive, and also JFK, so he basically saw that there was something redemptive in the Democratic Party that could be worked with, and then he became a Democrat to try to revive that better tradition within the swamp.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and he was very right.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Please, go ahead.
They actually shut down that magazine right when this paper was wrote.
Yeah, exactly.
1987 is when the FBI shut it down.
There you go.
Oh, yeah, not a surprise.
Mm.
And he was very right to be so enthusiastic about the energy of the future, because the tokamak, which is the toroidal camera, magnetomy camera, which is the Russian name for the donut-shaped coins to produce the artificial sun, is truly the future, because now I'm sure the French are quite good at that too, but lately, meaning some months ago, China succeeded to maintain a high temperature for 17 or 18 minutes. Okay, so we're not at some seconds now, we in the minutes now. Okay, and it was many times the temperature of the core of the sun. Okay, and we need only the temperature of the sun to provoke the fusion, not many times. So I think it's not so far-fetched to hope for something practical maybe in the next 20, 25 years.
Yeah, especially when you look at the alternative, because I mean, the tokamak is one particular approach, but there's so many simultaneous, fruitful alternative approaches to fusion that are that have made some really good progress. Which,
something more.
Any one of them could surprise us, huh?
Or something even more modest, like the molten salt thorium reactors. Which would be less messy than the uranium reactors, for example. Okay, not even something more modest.
Could
be so very interesting too. Yeah,
and they're building that already in China, and I think the Gobi Desert, they're building a prototype for thorium molten salts. I think they're already producing heat.
Is Canada making the famous modular small reactor, or?
Yeah, apparently. We got to talk to Kwao about to get him to give us an update on that. Kwao's our friend who works in the Canadian nuclear sector. He's doing some cutting edge stuff on thorium too. So yeah, let's actually talk to Kwao and ask about that.
But for those small reactors, it's uranium based. It's not thorium based.
No, but he's working on thorium reactors too. He's got the small modular reactors for the Arctic, and then he's got his other side project of thorium.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Sean, you shared a link. What is this?
That's what Kwan's talking about. I've been reading a lot about this the last 6 to 9 months. It's called East.
Yes.
And they did something like Kwan said, 15 minutes or 17 minutes, at 5 times the temperature of the sun. Damn. And when you can finally stabilize that and make it make it reliable, it's sustainable energy. True sustainable energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, it will be glorious when it will be done, because from that level, mankind will never have problems in energy. Okay, never, 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 never.
Exactly.
The next step is will be the PZ0 from Stargate.
And shared a link to Cynthia Chung's "What Determines a Limit to Growth." It's a great essay with so many exciting, cutting-edge new discoveries that are going to be made, that already have been made or will be made, on every aspect of agriculture, energy, nuclear, you name it, and it's super exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Malthusians don't really have a lot to hold on to. There's not a lot really when you start thinking just a little bit, which most people don't get that far. But when you start just thinking about all of the ways to overcome the population problems that we currently have, there's so many solutions. Even just using what we currently have, even not even making new discoveries, just using the discoveries that we already have justly would eliminate hunger like 3 times over easily. And then we start talking as well about then no longer handicapping or sabotaging the cutting edge discoveries that should have been made over the past 50 years. You know, like look at the shutdown of the funding of NASA's budget. The peak of NASA's budget was in 1966, and the cutting of it started right after 66. You know, it was a miracle that we even, did anything by 69. But then by 1973, it was down to less than 1%. And by 1983, it was down to 0.5%. And it remained that way ever since and kept that way. And same thing for fusion power. We were investing more in terms of a proportion of GDP into fusion energy, fusion rockets in the 60s. And all of that, when the Malthusians took over, they made sure that all of these things were just shut down. And then people got demoralized. The greatest scientists who actually had the living knowledge and made the breakthroughs got demoralized. They got old, they died, they gave up. And the new generation just increasingly didn't have the living knowledge of this process. So that's, I think, again, the importance of what China and Russia are doing right now by making these high priorities is they're bringing this knowledge back to life, and that's vital if we're going to be able to transmit that to the younger generations from the older ones who built society.
Yeah, I remember if you went to kindergarten graduation back in the 80s or 90s, you could commonly hear, "I want to be an astronaut when I grow up," but it's a YouTube star now. Nobody wants to be astronauts.
Yeah, wild, eh? Yeah.
Terrible.
All right, guys, this is a good reading. Next week, we'll do Hamilton. So whether the report on manufacturers or whether the constitutionality of the National Bank, Hamilton is a really rich read, very high quality English. So it's a challenging expression of English. They were just so much smarter than we are today back in the 1790s. So it'll be a fun mental exercise to push through it.
Looking forward to that.
Cool. All right, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay, good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
You guys.